Hello, welcome to Fiberchats. My name is Irina, and my guest today is Heather Storta. Hello, Heather.
Hi.
And we actually met at Rhinebeck 2 years ago, right before COVID. I took your Estonian lace class. Um, was Estonian lace specifically dear and near to your heart, or how does, in general, being an instructor at Rhinebeck works? How do you get to pick the class that you wanna teach?
Um, yeah, I love Estonian lace. But I'll answer your second question. Most shows will say that we'll have a window when they're accepting proposals for classes. So teachers will put together class proposals and send those in, and then the shows will have a selection process and decide which classes they want to offer and which instructors they want to bring in. Um, every show works a little bit differently, but that's the general process. And usually the call for class proposals is a year, sometimes about a year to 9 months before the show.
Right.
So yeah, I had never taught at Rhinebeck before. I had never been to Rhinebeck before, and I submitted a whole bunch of class proposals, and they selected, I think that year they selected 4 of my classes, and I was super excited. And yeah, and that was one of them.
Right. And so when did you first start teaching?
I I've been teaching knitting since around, I think it's around 2007 or so. I wasn't a master knitter yet, but I taught at a local yarn shop. Um, and I loved it. And I I began my master knitter process in 2000, right around there, 2007. Um,
How was that program for you? Did you love it? Did it take you forever? Were you like super fast through it?
I loved it. It did take me forever, but that was because I had 2 young children. I have 2 little boys at the time. They're now high schoolers. My oldest is going to graduate in the spring. Um, and so level 1 is all the basic knitting stuff. So that took me, it still took me 2 years to complete that one, just because life
Right.
was really hectic. But then level 2, I didn't finish level 2 until like 2000, I think it was 2013, because it's a lot there. There's a lot more to it, and it's more finicky. It's all finishing work and that kind of stuff. So yes, and I was right in the really great years of when your kids are little. So it took me a good, really long time. But then when I finished level 2, I was like, that's it, I'm gonna finish the whole shebang. And I did nothing but master knitter work on the master knitter level 3, and I got my pin in 2014. So
Right.
um, took me about a year to finish level 3.
Did you have a favorite level?
Level 3. I think if you ask master knitters, they will all tell you level 3 is their favorite. That because you are playing with really fun stitches, and you are getting to design your own sweater and your own hat, and you're playing with color work. And yeah, so that one was my favorite level.
Right. I'll ask you the same question I asked Donna Astin, who is also a certified master knitter. Uh, did you start looking at that point, like when you finished the level 3? Were you looking extra critical at everything you do, and how did you deal with that perfectionism?
Um, yeah, so I think as you go through the master knitter program, you develop that eye to and I think probably a common personality trait of everyone that goes through the Master Knitter program is a little bit of perfectionism
Right.
anyway. So yeah, and then you really develop that eye to catch the things that are not quite right. And that so it's a bit of, you know, balancing. You have to learn to balance, you know, how far is too far to take this critical, this looking critically at my work.
Right. Um, so I see all those gorgeous examples of your fair isle. Do you have a favorite style? Like, I mean, you said that you love Estonian lace and you know, obviously love Fair Isle. Like, is there something that you always gravitate toward? Is there like a comfort food in knitting for you?
Yeah, my comfort food in knitting would be just plain old socks, plain
Really?
stockinette stitch socks. I always have a pair on the needles because they're portable. I don't have to think about them. You can just pick them up, and it doesn't matter where you are in the pattern. I usually will do, a lot of times we'll do an afterthought heel. So I'm just knitting a tube the whole time until I'm done with the cuff. So yeah, and they're small, so I can take them to doctor's offices, waiting rooms, you know, if I'm waiting for the kids at the orthodontist or whatever. Yeah, so that's my comfort food, but I adore, there's a lot of knitting that I adore. I adore lace and Estonian lace. I adore Fair Isle. I adore cables. So yeah, there's a lot of things I love. I love in knitting.
So now that like after you finish level 3 and you design your hat and the sweater, were they first designs of yours or did you design prior to that?
No, I had been designing. Let me see, I think it was 2009. I got a lace shawl pattern published in Knitty. And then I self-published a few things. And then I think it was 2014 was a big year for me because I not only earned my master knitter certification, but I got my first print publication pattern published in Cast On Magazine, a pair of socks. And then I also was I was asked to teach, or I submitted class proposals for the Knit and Crochet Show, which was in Charleston that year. And they accepted like 3 of my classes. And that was a pretty big deal for me because that was a huge, doesn't go on anymore, but at the time, that was a really big knitting and crocheting conference
Right.
show. And I was really excited to be able to teach there.
How is the teaching different when you teach in a local yarn shop versus when you come to like a large festival?
It's much more it's much more, I guess, I want to say personal, but it's still personal even at the larger shows. It's I guess more intimate is the better word. When you're teaching in a local yarn shop, you have fewer students. You can really get to know them, especially if it's a multi-session class. So you're able to hold multi-session classes more easily at local yarn shops. If you're teaching there repeatedly, you get repeat students. You really get to know your students really well. But compared to larger shows, not all teachers get to teach at the same shows repeatedly from year to year. So you never know when you're going to be teaching at a particular show.
Right.
And so it's harder to get that personal, to get to know your students really well. And usually those classes are much larger. So you have to be prepared. It's a different style of teaching as well, a bit, because you can be a lot more hands-on in a local yarn shop where you only have maybe 5, 6 students sitting around you. But at the larger shows, you can have upwards of 30, 25, 30 students, you have to be able to present so that everyone can get the same experience, and try to get around to every student to make sure they're not having any trouble. And yeah, so there's slightly different approaches to those two types of teaching.
Right. And it's funny because like when I went to Rhinebeck, it was my first Rhinebeck as well. And your class was actually my very first knitting class.
Uh-huh.
That's probably like that's why it made such an impression. But I noticed that like when you taught at Rhinebeck, the class was very balanced because we did get to knit, not the entire, obviously, because it's lace, it's complicated, not much, but we did get to knit. But you also had this whole presentation about history of Estonian lace and like different kinds of stitches. So I felt like I left the class with some like new set of skills and new knowledge, basically. So it's probably like also hard to balance like how much information you load into the class.
Yeah. And I love the history. Anytime I can provide history, I love to provide that, but not all students like to get that information in a knitting class. So I have gotten feedback in the past where, complaining about this. So it is a balance. You're not going to please everyone, but, I do try to provide at least some history whenever it's relevant, and in my classes, because I find it fascinating, and I feel like there's at least some number of my students that would also find it fascinating. And but I don't dive too deep. I provide references and resources so that you can do more studying on the history if you're so inclined. But yeah, because a lot of students are like, we just want to get to the knitting. just let's get to the knitting.
How do you deal with like these negative feedbacks? Like how like unaffected you are by that, or how personally do you take that, and how do like what do you learn from it, and like how do you deal with it, basically?
I find that, so you have to kind of have a healthy approach to negative criticism, and sometimes, honestly, I find it hard. I sometimes take things too personally, but I try to sit back then and analyze and talk myself down and say, wait, okay, don't take it personally. What can I learn from this? And a lot of time it's the negative criticism that you learn the most from, really. When everyone, when students are like, oh, I just loved your class, and give no feedback other than that, well, that's fantastic. I love that. That's my goal, is for every one of my students to say that at the end of the class. But I learn more about what things I can improve by the negative feedback. And sometimes it comes in kind of mean and you have to kind of set that aside, and get to the kernel of what the issue is,
Right.
and try to address that. Yeah, and then I take that feedback and try to determine what I can do differently the next time that would solve this problem.
Do you feel like the master knitting program helped you with like how to structure your classes better, like helped you to get that confidence that you are the professional?
I feel like the master knitter program, yes, helped me gain the confidence. I know I have the knowledge base of general knitting and of a few specific knitting topics. The TKGA-Certified knitting instructor course, that gave me more confidence on my approach to putting together classes and how to handle different situations. And so those two things combined really give me a good foundation for teaching.
Can you tell a little bit more about that instructor class? Like, how was that structured? How long that takes, and what kind of skills do you learn there?
That course is a certification course, and it it is, I'm having trouble remembering exactly. I believe there were 3 modules, and you're working one-on-one with Leslie Gonzalez, our Vice President of Certification at TKGA. And so the course, the certification course, you are working through different, answering questions about different situations, different knitting situations, answering some general knitting knowledge questions as well. But most of it is you are putting together class lesson plans and samples and those kinds of things. And then working through like how to put together a proposal for a show, those kind of things. It's a really excellent certification course.
But you have been teaching prior to that course, right? What
Yeah.
made you wanna take that course?
I wanted to take it just to get that extra little, you know, professional certification kind of stamp of approval, kind of, I guess. Yeah, so I had already been teaching. It was almost more of a reassurance kind of thing. Is there, you know, is there anything that I can learn to do better, or is there anything I'm missing in when I'm putting together my classes, that kind of
So
thing. So
after you finished the course, did you feel like it was well worth it, or did you feel like it was probably fine if you skipped it just because you already knew all of that stuff?
I learned some things. So I personally felt, even though I had already been teaching, I felt that it was worth it personally for me.
Right. And then I noticed that you have a YouTube channel.
Yes.
And well, one of the things I've learned from you on that YouTube channel that we should say, please subscribe, please hit the like button. So I somehow like I never do that, but if you guys enjoying this interview, please subscribe and please like the video. But when you're doing the your YouTube channel, it's basically concentrating on the techniques. So
Yes.
you're showing like certain ways of doing things better. Why did you decide to go that way? Because there's like already some established channels right out there. What was your thinking process behind that decision to go that way?
I think I started initially because I was writing some articles for Cast On magazine and felt like and I felt like I needed videos to go along with my articles. And there aren't too many master knitters. There are quite a few master knitters with YouTube channels, but you know, it's the majority of knitting channels are not master knitters.
Right.
And there's the master knitter program is kind of picky about how you do some things. So potential master knitter students or people going through the program are looking for specific tutorials to provide as their references, because every single answer to a question, every single technique on your swatches in the program require 2 references. So I also kind of started it so that there were other references out there for those people, but it's grown to I'll do a technique video on any topic that a knitter wants.
How do you come up with the topics for it? Like, do you need something and you do some certain technique and you're like, oh, I should make a video about it? Or do people ask about it?
A little bit of both. And I've got, I'm a big planner person. I have to have everything down on paper. So I have my business planner and there's a whole section of pages in the back for video ideas. And as I think of them or people ask about them, I jot it down. So I have a huge list, and I will kind of pre-plan about a month ahead and go through my list and say, what do I want to do, for my next set of videos? And I'll pick 4 and then film them over the course of a couple of days, and then edit them and that kind of thing. Yeah.
Right. Do you ever stress over the fact that you should post something and you haven't posted it, or you haven't filmed it, or like something busy in your life and you don't have time for that? Like, does that stress you out?
Yeah. As things get busy, and I, like, for instance, I had filmed the video I was going to use for this coming Friday, but it was not good. I kept making mistakes, and the needles were hitting the table, and I've got probably an hour worth of video that's going to result in a 5-minute video, but I just scrapped the whole thing, and I need to refilm it. So yeah, there is a little bit of self-imposed stress there, because I feel like I need to release a new video every Friday at the very least. And if I don't have something prepared, then I start to stress a little bit. But I think everybody would understand. I'm pretty sure everybody would understand it if I skipped a week. But I still feel like I'm letting them down if I skip a week here and there.
Do you feel the same thing about being designer? Like, do you feel like if you don't pop up designs every so often, that the world is like taking a notice and wondering what's wrong with Heather?
Right. Yeah, there's some of that too. I have so many balls in the air business wise. I also tech edit, so I'm tech editing for other designers, and I'm designing, and I'm teaching, and I'm doing the YouTube channel. And yeah, so if any one of those, if things get overwhelming and any one of those things kind of dips, I kind of freak out.
So is that like a weekly occurrence, or is it like once in a blue moon thing when something like just happens that you're getting off the schedule? Like, how often do you have this sense of panic? And
not too often. Usually I'm pretty good at, because of my planner, I can see what I have coming up, and I can make sure I don't accept any tech editing work in these weeks, and because I know I'm going to be working really hard to finish up a design that has a deadline, or I'm going to be going on vacation, or something like that. So it doesn't happen too often. It more happens with the YouTube channel, because that's kind of lower on my priority list. The other items all have deadlines.
right.
The YouTube channel is more self-imposed deadlines. So yeah, so it more happens with the YouTube channel than any of the other things. But
so you
yeah.
mentioned on your Instagram header that you homeschooling your boys. Is that still the case?
Yes.
So do you find like having them, I mean, now that we all went through COVID and suddenly all of us became the homeschooling parents, right? We all grew the appreciation of the hard work that homeschooling parents used to do before COVID. Do you find it easier, the fact that like you have them at home and you don't have to like schlep them to school and all that stuff, to balance your work stuff? Or is it like because they always home, it's even more difficult for you?
Now it's not too bad. I'm earlier when they're more in the elementary to middle school grade. So my oldest is a senior right now and will be graduating in the spring, and my youngest is 2 years younger, but is a junior, and he will only have 2 years left. In the elementary and middle school grades, it is much more labor intensive on my part.
Right.
So I was not really able, and I didn't really start my business per se until around 2014 or so, when all my teaching started picking up and all of that kind of thing. So it's really, really hard when you're homeschooling and they're in those ages where a lot of it falls on my shoulders. But as they get older, they are learning independent learning, and I'm just kind of the guidance counselor,
Right.
the guiding voice, and they come to me when they need help. And I have a chemical engineering degree, so I was teaching chemistry, or I'm finishing up teaching them chemistry. So that's taking a little bit more of my time over the last year or so as we've been working through that, because I really wanted to teach them chemistry.
Right.
I could have outsourced it, but I felt like I wanted to do that class. But most of their other classes are outsourced in one way or another. They're taking online classes, or they're using online tools, and they come to me only when they need help. And then my oldest is going to be starting dual enrollment at the community college here in a couple weeks.
Right.
So he'll be taking a college course that will count as one of his high school classes too. So all that to say, I have more time now that they're older, even though I am still homeschooling them, because they're much more independent. And so I can focus on my business, running my business much more than I could have when they were younger.
Well, let's backpedal a little bit. So you mentioned that you are an engineer. How do you go from being an engineer to becoming a full-time knitting designer, knitting instructor? Like, how did that change happen?
That happened gradually. I was working when my husband and I got married. We met and were married in Georgia. We were living in Georgia at the time, and he got a job offer up in Charlotte, North Carolina, early in our marriage. And so we moved to Charlotte, and I never got back into the workforce. I was a stay-at-home wife, and then fairly soon after, a stay-at-home mother.
Right.
And so my children were my focus, and we homeschooled from the very beginning. And so, yeah.
How did you knit all your life? Did you knit as a child?
No, I learned how to crochet. I've done a lot of fiber arts from a very young age, but I never learned how to knit until actually my oldest was just born, and I was a stay-at-home mom, and I decided one night a week. There was a local yarn shop very close to us at the time in the evenings, one night a week, we're offering learn to knit classes. And I had never learned how to knit. My grandmother had taught me how to crochet, so I did have that kind of background. And I did a lot of cross stitch and and embroidery and those kinds of fiber arts, but never knitting. So I told my husband, I said, you're going to watch the baby, for a few hours, one night every single week, and I'm going to go learn how to knit. And I took to it right away. I think having known how to crochet helped a good bit. But my first project was a scarf, and my second project was a sweater. And and I loved it, and it became my passion. And as soon as I then found out about the Master Knitter program, I was like, oh, I've got to do that. And then kind of the rest is history.
Well, talking about your husband, so he goes from just babysitting a child for a few hours a week to having a wife who is a certified master knitter. How was this journey for him? Like, did he ever complain? Was he always supportive? Was there like any time when he was frustrated with your schedule, your YouTube, your all these things you do?
No, he's wonderful. He's always been supportive. He just wants me to be happy, and he loves that my business has kind of grown, and yeah, and has never complained when I've said, "Oh, I'm going to be teaching for a whole weekend," in
Right.
wherever, and I need you to watch the kids, and just make sure they, stay out of trouble. And
Right.
he's like, sure, yeah.
That's wonderful. How about the boys? Do they like always wear what you make? Do they bag stuff? Do they brag to their friends about you?
No, I don't think. When they were little, they wore everything I would knit for them, and they loved it. Now, they're kind of moody teenagers, so they, and it's both boys, so they, no, they think it's cool that I do what I do, but they don't think it's that cool.
Do they ever make fun of you because you're on Instagram, because you're on YouTube, because you're like, you're a YouTuber. The mom is YouTuber.
No, my youngest, actually, he wants to be a YouTuber, so he's a little bit jealous.
My son was actually, he came home and he's like, I don't believe parents nowadays. They're like Instagram influencers, YouTubers. Like, where did I go wrong? Do they help you like ever with tech advice?
My husband does. Well, sometimes my sons do. They know a little bit more about some of the social media stuff than my husband doesn't know any of that stuff, but my sons sometimes do.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about your sense of fashion, because what I remember the most, and I'm gonna put that picture in this interview, was your dress and your hair and like, so you love dressing up, you love all the girly fashion. How did that came into play? Was it always your passion, or did you discover at some point?
I've always loved, I'm a girly girl, so I've always loved dressing up and doing makeup and doing hair. And I've always really had an affinity for 40s and 50s styles. But I haven't always dressed in the 40s and 50s styles myself. I started doing the hair. I have a lot of hair, and when I'm teaching, I need it to be off my face. So I started doing the hair, the 40s and 50s inspired hair, mostly just to keep it off my face. But then that kind of started a little downward spiral where, well, if I'm doing the hair, I really need to do the makeup. Well, and if I'm doing the hair and the makeup, I really need to do the clothes that go with the look, right? So that's how that kind of started, all spurred on from my teaching. And now really whenever I'm going to dress up or even just put some makeup on to go outside, well, I usually have to do the whole shebang. So.
Is that ever like a conversation starter, like when you're meeting other people or when you're meeting other instructors?
Always, yeah.
And do you also like I noticed like I was watching this TV show and like what, for the life of me I can't remember the name of the show, but it was about like the late 40s, like right after the war in England, and I don't even remember what the show was about. It was like something not even that interesting, but the needs that everybody was wearing. I was just sitting there with my phone and taking constant pictures of like every outfit that was on that program. Do you do that as well?
Yes. Oh yeah. We'll be watching something and I'll be like, pause it. I need to get my phone and take a picture of what they're wearing. Yeah, there's some fantastic knitwear on, the costume designers for a lot of these shows, and not even necessarily vintage shows either, but there's some sci-fi shows where there's some awesome knitting that pops up, and yeah, it's amazing to see when that happens, when you see some really fantastic knitting on TV or movies.
Well, talking about fantastic knitting, so when you were at Rhinebeck, right? So this is like the first time you coming to Rhinebeck, and it's like we're talking 70,000 people on that weekend. What was your impression of Rhinebeck? What was like your favorite thing about it? And do you remember any particular needs that got your attention there?
I loved it. It's probably one of the biggest shows I've ever been to. SAF here in the Southeast is large. I don't know the numbers exactly, but Rhinebeck was so much bigger and spread over such more area. And my overall like takeaway from Rhinebeck was just, it was so nice to be, to be among my people. you know, Everyone's so nice, and no one you meet is not a friend. Everyone you meet is already a friend. It's amazing. So if you've never been to a show at all, I mean, go to a knitting show, because they're all like that. You know that you can wear your knitting and everyone's going to stop you and want to feel it and admire it. And then, you want to stop everyone and feel their knitting and admire their knitting and get inspired. And I don't remember any piece of knitwear specifically, but I just remember there were just tons of gorgeous knitting sweaters and shawls and hats, and it was just wonderful.
How long in advance of Rhinebeck did you plan your wardrobe for the weekend?
I had knitted, so the vest back here, I knitted that as my Rhinebeck sweater. So that had been planned for a good 6 months, probably around then, ahead. And then, I kind of stressed about what to bring with me to wear. I have a good number of poofy skirt dresses and petticoats, and which dress should I bring? I only have 4 days, so 4 outfits, and I have to narrow it down and decide which to bring, and what should I wear with my vest, and also take into account the fact that it's at fairgrounds. It could be rainy and muddy and
cold.
And cold. So I did kind of obsess a little bit over what I was bringing with me.
And do you feel like you were stressing more about what you're going to wear, or more about how you're going to teach and what you're going to teach and all that stuff?
The leading up, I was stressing more about what I was going to wear. I prep my classes. Because I'm such a planner, I make sure I have plenty of lead time to prep my classes really well in advance and get all of my supplies together and whatnot. So because I have that planned out, there's a little bit less stress involved. But I didn't really have my wardrobe planned out in advance very well. So that was the more stressful part leading up. But then I do get very nervous right before, the morning of my first class. I do get very nervous, a little bit, stage fright kind of nervousness. Am I going to remember? Oh goodness, am I going to remember the stuff I need to teach?
Do you ever get that, like, I mean, I've talked a lot on my interviews recently about the imposter syndrome. Do you ever get that, like, am I really an expert? Like, what if somebody questions me and I don't know what to answer? Like, do you get that sense?
Yeah, all the time. All the time.
So
but I have to remind myself that it's okay to say I don't know, and that I'll look it up and email you the answer, or I don't know, but you can probably go to this and this resource to find the answer. And yeah.
Right. I wanted to ask you also about your designs. What are you working on right now? Like, do you have some exciting plans?
I have a plain vest that will be coming out in the winter issue of Cast On Magazine, which will kind of be a companion to the plain vest that just came out in the fall issue. The fall issue, I wanted to write a size inclusive basic vest pattern. But because Cast On Magazine restricts you to 7 sizes, I did the larger range for the fall, and I'll do the smaller range for the winter, so that combined, those two will be a nice, 14 sizes across the 2 patterns. And then farther in the future, I have some knee socks and an article that I'll be writing about knee socks. I've got a cardigan that I'm planning to self-publish that is still kind of wallowing. I knit it in a cotton blend yarn and I don't quite like it, so I think I'll be re-knit it. So that's farther. I have to figure that out, and that'll be coming sometime. I don't know when though.
How do you prioritize, like, what do you work on first, design wise?
Well, the deadline stuff has to take priority. I like to try to get those early. I don't like to be right up against a deadline. So usually I'll have a lull between deadline work where I've finished one and I don't have another one coming for a little bit. So in those lulls, I can focus on the things that I want to self-publish, or the things where the rights have reverted back to me. I need to reformat them so that I can self-publish them, and those kinds of things.
Do you prefer self-publishing to working in magazines, or vice versa?
I like both. I have to take care of my stress levels. So a lot of publishers have really tight deadlines between when your idea is accepted and they get you the yarn and you have to provide the finished pattern and the sample. And so I don't propose to those the publications that would have those really tight deadlines, especially for for an accessory like a hat or a scarf or gloves. That would probably be all right. I'd have plenty of time, but certainly not a sweater where you have to grade it across multiple sizes. And I've got to knit a whole entire sweater in, 2 weeks or something. Some of the deadlines are 2-3 weeks. And I don't want to put myself through that kind of stress. So I deal with, I make sure I only submit to those publishers that I know provide a nice buffer, a nice length of time before the deadline hits.
Right. Is there a class that was offered at Rhinebeck that you would absolutely, or any other festival, like if you had a dream class that you could take with any instructor, what would that class be?
Oh, that's a hard question. I don't know. I gravitate towards really advanced techniques. So I've taken a lace class with Galena, and I've taken some classes with Stephanie Pearl McPhee, and I really, because I love history, I gravitate towards those kinds of classes that are advanced techniques that are kind of steeped in history, where I can learn, the background, but also learn some techniques. And so those are the classes that I gravitate towards.
Right. This is, by the way, the shawl. Remember that I was
Oh,
Galena,
yes.
my first Orenburg shawl.
Yes.
We actually have a picture with it. do you have any plans of teaching for this year already? Like that now that the festivals are reopening?
Yes, I will be teaching. Let me see. I'm planning to go to Rhinebeck, but I'm not teaching. They're doing all virtual classes this year. I will be going to SAF, but not teaching there as well. And then I'm teaching in November in Portland, Oregon at the TKGA retreat. So I'm really excited about that. And then I'm teaching later in November at Unwind Retreat, which is in Blowing Rock, North Carolina. And that's a small retreat. I love that retreat. So I'll be teaching there as well. Yeah, so that's what I've got coming up
Right.
teaching wise.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. I hope I'll see you at Rhinebeck because I'm
Yes.
planning to go there as well. So
Oh, awesome. Yeah, we should plan to meet up.
well, thank you so very much for being my guest today. I loved having
Thank you
you
for
over.
having me.
And I hope I'll get to see you soon. Like it's coming up really soon, actually.
Yeah, it is.